Welcome back to our second COVID-19 economic update. It has been 59 days since March 15th, and much has happened. In late March, we talked about what might the programs be. In the late part of April, we spent trying to figure out how to interpret those plans and what we qualified for. We are now in the process of implementing and applying for those subsidies that we actually qualify for. After the last 2 months, I would still suggest to everybody out there that you seek professional advice as to the ways and how that you can qualify for the programs. There's more than one way. The next steps are now, how do we adapt our business to the new normal? I would like to welcome back Dr. Peter Andersen, a friend and colleague, who will take us through where we have been, but more importantly, where we are going and how rough the waters will be ahead. Dr. Peter Andersen.
Jason, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen on the line, thank you very much for your time. I know that we all have more questions than answers, and I'll try and do my best to let you know where I am as of today, as of right now. And in terms of when this all began, the first case in the United States was January 21st. January 21st. That was the first case, somebody who had entered the country. The first case that was that had originated through community spread in the country was February the 26th. February 26th. And then 59 days ago, well, I count that as being March the 16th, Monday the 16th of March, and how things have changed since then. The recession has probably been more than a recession. It has just been a deep freeze. It has been a crash. It has been basically an economic shutdown. And what I'm going to tell you today is that I would use the word restart. I'm not going to use the word recovery. I'm using the word restart. And I think that the analogy would be the dimmer switch. I think we're starting to gradually turn up the dimmer switch. But let me just say a few things before I get started. I want to emphasize how deep this has been. I think that the trough, the bottom, the absolute bottom, will be in April. But that peak to trough, going from pre-COVID to the bottom, 3 times worse, everyone. 3 times worse than the great financial crisis, the last recession. So it's something that we really haven't experienced. It's more than just our lifetimes. It's modern times. It's more than any kind of historical record. We don't have history to guide us. So really be careful. Beware of forecasts. Beware of false precision in forecasts. I think the thing to focus on is orders of magnitude, rather than anything that looks to be numerical and precise. One of the things I would throw out just at the beginning, the stock market tells a lot. We all look at it. We look at it every day, and we typically look at the Dow. Well, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, March 23rd, okay, March 23rd, hit a low of 18,214 at the close, 18,214. Anyway, if there is any good news, it's held up. Right now, today, the last I looked, just a few minutes ago, it's at over 23,000 still on the Dow. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because a stock market crash can really unsettle investors, households, individuals in terms of their wealth. We economists talk about a wealth effect, and a stock market crash, if it destroys wealth, it makes the recession even deeper, makes it more like a depression, makes it harder to get out of. But that's not happened, okay? The reason it hasn't happened, and by the way, let me throw in another number just as a yardstick. Christmas Eve. We all like to think of Christmas Eve. We remember Christmas Eves from years past. Well, I'm not going to say last Christmas Eve, but I'm going to say the one before that. Christmas Eve 2018, the Dow closed at 21,700 that day. Okay? So we're still above that as well. Now, the reason for it is liquidity. The Federal Reserve has been flooding the system with liquidity. And that liquidity has found its way into asset prices, especially into stock prices. So that's good news. And in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, you might think that I'm being too optimistic by looking at Germany as an example. Angela Merkel, her quote, "Life can continue with the virus." It's a heavy statement. But combine it with the point that 80% of the cases, 80% of the deaths are in the high-risk population. If we can put a firewall around those people, if we can protect those people, the 80% who are the most vulnerable, 80% of the deaths in the high-risk population, people in nursing homes, okay, people in nursing homes. And if we can protect them, I think it's possible that the economy can be opened up. So that's where the second wave comes into play. We all have that in our mind. Are we opening up too quickly? Will there be a second wave that comes along and forces all of us back into lockdown? Well, I would ask the question, what kind of second wave? Have we actually learned anything from the last 60 days, the last 90 days? I think we have. I think that we've learned who the most vulnerable are. We know that they need to be protected. And what is different now is we do have a toolkit, a therapeutic toolkit, that hopefully can lessen the blow of the virus. And I guess I'd also say, well, today was Jobs Day. Well, Unemployment Claims Day in the United States every Thursday. More than 30 million applications for unemployment insurance in the United States. The number is running at around 35 million right now. Are those jobs really wiped out? We hear that a lot on the media, that these jobs are wiped out. No, I don't think so. I think a lot of those jobs are there as the economy begins to restart. And that's what I'm saying right now. I'm thinking that the economy is restarting, that these jobs are not really totally wiped out. And look at the stimulus in the United States. It looks like it's about $5 trillion in stimulus. Well, that's over 20% of gross domestic product. It's more than 2 times the amount of stimulus that was thrown into the hopper during the great financial crisis. Anyway, one more thing before I get started. I really haven't gotten started yet. It's a biological event. The cause is clear. It's a biological cause. And the solution is also clear. It's going to be a biological solution. So we do have a therapeutic toolbox, a vaccine. Well, hopefully we get one in 2021. But a therapeutic toolbox, we have learned we could be able to soften the second wave of this virus. But when the vaccine comes, it will be an end game. It will remove all uncertainty. Obviously, there's going to be distribution issues in terms of vaccine, the vaccine or the vaccines when they are available. But nonetheless, there will be a big change. So that's a big difference from the Great Depression of the 1930s, and a big difference also from the Great Financial Crisis of 2008, 2009. We didn't have an end game at that time. Now I think we do have an end game. Anyway, that's just my hello, how are you initial set of remarks. This is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk a bit about made in Canada problems. Made in Canada problems. I want to talk about why the U.S. economy will restart. this summer. I want to talk about construction and manufacturing because I think these will be the first sectors to recover, construction especially. And I don't think Canada will open as quickly as the United States. Why is that? And then we all know there are big structural changes coming, big ones. So I want to talk about that as well. And finally, to wrap up, it's a trend accelerator. What we have happening right now, it's a trend accelerator. It's taking trends that were already in place and it's magnifying them and giving them a big push forwards. So those are the things that are on my agenda today, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. I know that some of these webinars go too long and get kind of boring. At least that's my opinion on some of the ones I've listened to. So I'm going to try and keep my eye on the time here to keep your attention. So forgive me if I gloss over things too quickly. And maybe if you have a question or two at the end of the event, maybe you can send Jason an email. Let him know what your questions are that you didn't get a chance to ask and that you would like to ask. And he can relay them on to me, and we can get back to you. How's that sound, Jason? Not a bad idea. Anyway, let's talk about made in Canada problems. Oil, okay, 6 times more important than the auto sector. 7% approximately of Canada's gross domestic product. Oil prices went negative briefly, as you know, through the quirk in the futures markets because of storage issues a month ago. Now, it's interesting because next Tuesday, we also have the settlement date for the June delivery contract in the futures markets. We could see some news again on oil prices on the downside. Nonetheless, Canada is an oil-producing country, and we are particularly vulnerable. Even if oil gets back to $30 a barrel, looking at West Texas, it's still at crisis levels. Anything that far south of $50 is a crisis. And Canada's oil and gas industry was basically on life support at the end of last year before any of this happened. So Canada's particularly exposed as a national economy to the oil weakness. Debt, household debt, family debt. What's happened in Canada is that households have not got their balance sheets in order. They have not moved debt levels down. And as a share of the economy, which is how we look at household debt, put it in relative terms, we're up over 100% of gross domestic product in terms of household debt. In the United States, it's been going down steadily. Since 2010, you've had a steady decline in U.S. household debt as a share of their economy, and it's down in the 70% range. We're 100%, slightly over. That's a lethal combination, everyone, when you combine that with high unemployment, lost incomes and lost jobs. And then, in terms of debt, a lot of it's mortgage debt, as you know. Well, in the United States, the CARES Act, C-A-R-E-S, the CARES Act provides for mortgage forbearance. That's not forgiveness, it's forbearance. And basically it means that 95% of all outstanding residential mortgages in the United States are open for mortgage forbearance. In other words, non-payment of mortgage interest for up to 180 days with an extension even longer than that to a full year. We don't have that in Canada. So we have this debt problem, and the Americans are in better shape. And the speed of the response. You know, I really am impressed with what Canada's policy makers have done. However, and that's the big however, I think it's been a bit slow in coming. I think the wage subsidy, great idea, but it hasn't lived up to the expectations of the people who put the plan together, probably because it's taken so long to apply for the system. And how about the targeting of specific sectors by the Canadian government? You know, I heard it was a matter of days before the oil industry was going to get targeted help. Well, that was a month ago. and I still am not convinced that Ottawa gets it, that the province of Alberta really needs more help. So what I'm saying is that we have made in Canada problems that I think are going to make the economic recovery a bit slower. And I'd also point out that Canada's economy was not in as good a shape as we'd like it before this all started. I'm not going to go into details on that, but that is, I think, a clear and present fact. So anyway, the United States, again, you can say the recession is going to end this summer in the United States, but that's not really a good way of phrasing it. We're at such a low, rock bottom, low level. It's restarting, okay? It's restarting. May, we have 43 states that are going to have a partial reopening in the United States. The numbers have grown rapidly. A week ago, it was 26 states were opening up in phases, gradually, in May, and now the number is up to 43. So what's happening in the U.S.? It's going to be a bit confusing. We'll have small increments in the actual level of activity, small dollar amount increments in terms of increased spending, increased incomes, and so on. But they'll look big on a percentage basis. So don't be misled. The percentage numbers will look big because you're coming from such a low level. But the actual absolute increments that the economy will show, they're going to be relatively small. So what I see is I see three stages in the United States. Now, as of the present time, the 14th of May, going until the second wave emerges. Okay, so I'm thinking that is going to be later in the fall. So you are going to see signs of regrowth, signs of a startup that continues May, June, July, August, September in the United States. And then the second wave of the virus that comes, let's say it comes November, December, which is the start of the typical flu season, if that's any kind of a guideline. We have the second phase between the next wave of the virus and when the vaccine comes. So that's when we have a situation which is a zigzag economy. We have the U.S. growing for a while from a very low base, and that's the go part, and then the slow to stop part. So it's not stop and go, it's go and stop or go and slow. And then when the vaccine comes, and after that, that's when we get into all of the structural changes and the trend acceleration that we're talking about. But in the first phase, I think construction is going to be one of the first sectors to recover, commercial and residential construction, because the on-site protocols, the virus supervision protocols, I think that they're more straightforward, certainly much more straightforward on a construction site than they are in a white-collar environment. And in the United States, construction has been an essential industry for most of the United States anyway, perhaps not in the Northeast, but certainly most of the rest. And the slowdown that you've seen in the United States in construction has not been as pronounced in Canada. Canada has been more constrained by the shutdown in construction than the United States. The slowdown in the United States has been kind of a supply chain effect, not enough personal protective equipment, and workers who have been unable to show up on job sites. And I think that's going to change. Anyway, construction does have a pipeline. It's got a pipeline of permit approvals, and it's got a pipeline of housing starts that are in place. And those backlogs of work, I think, are going to allow construction activity to be one of the first sectors to recover. Now, Canada, I don't think is going to open as quickly as the United States. We're not going to see the kind of restart in Canada that I think we're going to see this month in May and also in June in the United States, because the shutdowns are going to last longer. And again, I'm not going to argue that opening up the economy makes sense. All I'm saying is that it's happening. It's happening. Whether it makes sense or not, that's for the future really to tell us. But it is happening. And I don't think that the Canadian economy will restart as quickly either because of the policy response. Our policy response in Canada, the way I see it, it's been admirable. It's been wonderful. It's been amazing. But it's been even faster in the United States. And by that, I'll go back. I'm going to go back 60 days for that. I'm going to go back to Sunday, the 15th of March. The Fed had a meeting scheduled for Wednesday the 18th, but it couldn't wait. It couldn't wait to announce full-scale, unlimited quantitative easing. It had to do it on the Sunday afternoon, the 15th of March. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the speed. And in terms of targeted liquidity facilities, we've done well in Canada. We have, but I think that the Fed has moved faster and with more targeted credit facilities in the United States. So I think that the U.S. will restart more quickly than Canada. Now, in terms of the big picture here, looking down from maybe 30,000 feet, the structural changes that we are going to see coming out of this, I think, are going to be very big, very significant. For example, I don't think social distancing is going to go away for a long time. The virus will still be around. I think the best we can hope for is that we do get a vaccine and the vaccine availability is out there, but people will still be getting the virus. So social distancing is going to be part of the new lifestyle. And what does that mean? It means that crowded cities don't have the same attraction that they used to have. Crowded cities before used to mean energy, excitement, things to do, all of that. Now, people are worried about, well, here's a phrase for you, congregate settings. Write that down, congregate settings. Okay, that means nursing homes, but it means any kind of setting or center where there are lots of people crowded together closely. So the whole issue of urban density is up for grabs here. It could be, in terms of behavior and choices, a much different future for urban density. Retirement homes, well, perhaps older Canadians and older Americans will choose to age in other places than retirement homes, perhaps in their own homes or different homes, smaller homes. The future of condos, I think, is up in the air. Do people really want to be in elevators going to the 30th floor with a lot of strangers in face masks? And then public transit. Will people decide they would rather take their cars to work than take public transit? And what does that mean for municipal finances if you have a drop in ridership in terms of that? So that's one of the things I would look at in terms of structural changes. The other is globalization. I think that the whole just-in-time world, the just-in-time delivery world, I think it's going to shift to just-in-case. I think that you're going to want to have redundancies in the supply chain. To me, that means reshoring. It's repatriating the offshoring that's gone on, switching back to making product in the USA or close by, perhaps in Canada. So globalization, I think that's a big one. And finally, just to wrap up on this, and there are more that we can talk about, the other thing I'd mention would be the role of government. Perhaps going ahead, we're going to see a need for more government support in terms of guaranteed incomes, because it looks like the job losses that we're going to see longer term are going to be in lower income occupations and lower income jobs. And so the role of government is going to be something that is perhaps going to be part of this. Then I'm going to finish off by trend acceleration. In other words, trends that were already in place and already things that we knew about, but how they can really be affected. And of course, retail is one thing right here. We were talking about the retail Armageddon for a long time, how bricks and mortar retailers were going to be, dinosaurs and the thing of the past. Well, it seems that as more and more people over the last 60 days have gotten used to ordering online, it seems to me that this is really going to accelerate the decline of retail. So we're probably looking at thousands of retail establishments that do not reopen again, that are taken over by online retailing, and we're probably going to be looking at big surprises in department stores that don't make it, names that are familiar names that don't make it in the United States, and that often sets the trend for what happens in Canada. And then we have online working and online learning. These are all trends that were in place before this happened, and it seems to me that this is a big accelerator as well. The office of the future, I've heard several times, it's out there, that the major banks are wondering, do they need the same amount of office space going ahead? I've heard reports that companies are not all that displeased with having their staff work at home and are thinking of not renewing leases for as much square footage going ahead. And what will the schools of the future look like as students are more and more acclimatized to online learning? And how about the universities especially? Does the university life experience really have to be part of your budget? Or could you live 500 or 1,000 miles away from the university, show up every once in a while for some face-to-face, but basically spend most of your time at home and not having to pay expensive dormitory bills and to pay for food and so forth away from home? And then I guess finally, and I'm keeping it to only 3 things here in terms of trend acceleration, the whole idea of artificial intelligence and robotics, yes, that was a big effort to try and reduce costs. And you know that artificial intelligence more and more is moving into white-collar jobs and the service sector industry. Well, I would think that there's going to be really a push on lowering costs and increasing productivity on the other side of this as we get into the end of 2021 and into 2022. So I think that would be another trend accelerator. So let me see now. How much longer? Well, let me just mention a few more things here. I want to go on and just throw out a couple of ideas here for you. In terms of the end game here, I would watch Germany as a kind of a canary in the mine shaft. Germany has really opened up in May. They've opened up all stores and all schools. So I would watch them very carefully. They're ahead of us. I would watch them very carefully for any kind of a sign of a second wave. And in terms of what do we look at these days? Do we pay attention to the traditional economic indicator releases? Well, for one thing, they're so slow in getting out to us. These economic indicators that we're getting right now, hey, a lot of them are for the month of March. We're getting them for the month of April. But no, we don't want to know that. We want to know what's happening right now on the 14th of May. What's going on? So we don't get that from the traditional indicators. So we have to use our imagination and find some alternatives. So things like payments transactions. We can get payments transactions data from the credit card companies. We can also get traffic mapping. We can actually quantify the amount of movement that people are making. And we can also, of course, measure ridership, public transit. I was standing out on the corner yesterday. The U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds were doing a flyby over the city where I live, so I was out there waiting for them to come by. And it was interesting to see the amount of traffic on the main street in front of our house, how that had changed from just a week ago when it was dead empty, hardly a vehicle in sight, certainly a lot more vehicles. I didn't count them. I was thinking I should sit there with a garden chair and start counting the number of vehicles and do that every day. No, I'm not going to do that. But we need to look at different kind of indicators to let us know what's going on. Okay, so I think that's about it. I guess one of the things I would throw out as a final comment, how do we pay for all of this? How do we pay for all of it? Well, I thought that it was going to be we would pay with devalued dollars. We would let inflation take over, and inflation would mean we could pay off some of the bills by paying back with dollars that weren't worth as much. I don't know if that's going to happen now. My own feeling, I'm changing my mind on this. It looks to me as if certainly going out to the middle of the decade, it's going to be a time of very, very low inflation, because I think that the unemployment rate, while it will come down from crisis levels, my view is that next year and into the following year, that the unemployment rates in both Canada and the United States, and I'm talking order of magnitude here, not precise numbers, I'm saying the unemployment rates are going to be where they would typically be during an average recession. And that means a shortage of demand. So I don't see a surge of inflation when this is all over, even though money supply growth in the United States, 12-month change is over 20% in M2 money supply right now, which is just unbelievably high. So the helicopter money that we're seeing doesn't necessarily, to me, say that we're going to get inflation, and we need inflation to help pay for all of this. So how do we pay? Well, we pay over time, and I'm afraid we're going to pay with taxes. And what does that mean? Well, I think it means that the tax system will become more progressive, and I think that we could also see some changes with capital gains and with inheritance taxes as well. So let me end there, Jason, and give it back to you. I've talked for about half an hour, maybe a little bit longer. That's what I thought my limit was. So let me get back to you, Jason, and you can throw out a few questions if you have some. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. As always, very informative, and I think the audience will take things away and look at their own businesses and see how it's going to affect them and how they can make structural changes in their business. We have a couple of questions, and the first one would be is, you've talked about Germany. What role do you think China will play in this recovery, and the information that they disseminate to us, can it be trusted?
I'm very worried about that, Jason. I think that what we have on our hand right now is increased tension between the United States and China. And it looks to me as if China is not living up to its Phase 1 agreement on the trade deal. And I think that things will get worse before they get better between China and the United States. So I don't have a good outlook there. I think that'll be counterproductive.
And when you talk about 2020 and 2021 and unemployment being the mid part of a recession, how long do you think it will be before unemployment begins to return to where it is today, or was before March 15th?
That's a good question, Jason, and that's where I would use the word recovery very carefully. I wouldn't want to say that we have a recovery in the U.S. economy and the Canadian economy this summer, because a recovery gives the impression that you're returning to normal. What I would say is that all we have, we're turning up the dimmer switch. We're getting a restart on the economy from basically a dead stop in April. And in terms of getting back to anything that you would call a normal economy with an unemployment rate at acceptable levels, normal levels, let's say, I would say it's a long time coming. The unemployment rate has a tendency of going down fairly slowly after a situation like this. So I would say it wouldn't be until mid-decade. And to be optimistic, well, I can call that 2024 if you'd like, but still mid-decade.
A long time.
A long time.
Another question is, everybody talks about a vaccine or antibodies or a treatment. When we get a vaccine or a treatment or a combination of those things, what will people do? Will they return to the old normal, the structural change, the supply chain changes, the acceleration of changes, global workforce, all of those things? How will the vaccine and the antibodies and everything else affect the change that everybody has been talking about for the last 3 or 4 months?
We know, not being a medical person, I really can't say much about the vaccine. I guess what worries me is that the medical people that I have talked to, and I have talked to some CEOs of very big hospital systems, they seem to have no idea when a vaccine might be coming. The typical view on Wall Street is we're going to see something in the first part of next year in terms of a vaccine. Now, that'll basically mean that what normally would take 5 to 7 years, Jason, we're going to see in 5 to 7 months. So that would be like a medical technology miracle to see something like that. So it seems to me that in the very first instance, the best we can hope for is really this toolbox of therapeutic treatments, like remdesivir. I've been working on how to pronounce that. Remdesivir cuts down the time that people are in intensive care for this virus, things like that. And it seems to me that a toolbox is the right analogy to use, because there will be a number of things that come along that help us deal with the second wave, as well as behavior, because I think people are going to remain very spooked and very uneasy until we see this vaccine. But even when the vaccine is with us, there's the distribution issue, and that's going to be a challenge. And so in terms of distribution coverage, Jason, you know, as a business person, the kind of business issues that this distribution issue is going to cause. So it's going to be with us, I think, even after, if a vaccine is finally stamped and approved by the FDA, let's say by May of 2021, just getting it distributed in time for the 2021-2022 flu season is going to be a challenge.
So along that line, we've been so wrapped up in Europe and North America. There's been little talk, or I haven't heard a whole lot of talk about Africa and India and South America and the impact that the virus will have there and how they will be able to deal with it, or what help they will need from Europe and North America to actually get through, because they do not have the monetary strength to put in place the programs we have here.
That's right, Jason. Now, I'll let you know that one of the things that I like to do every day in terms of indicators, I like to look at worldometers. I think you've been looking at that too, right? So I would recommend that as a website to go to, Worldometers, worldometers.info/coronavirus/country. That has all the countries basically in the world in terms of the data, but we know that the only data that's really reliable would be for modern developed economies. So I tend to look a lot at South Korea to see what's happening there, because I really want to know if South Korea has shown any signs of a second wave. And then I also look at Australia to see what's going on in Australia. Are they going to get a second wave, and is it going to be related to a seasonal factor? But when it comes to India and other parts of Asia and also to South America, I'm really worried about that, Jason, because I don't think these countries have anything like the financial and medical ability to throw into the war against this virus. So it's another reason why, even if there is a vaccine developed in the United States in 2021, this virus is going to be bouncing around all over the world, in Africa and South America and Asia. And these countries, many of them are important, very important for the global economy in terms of materials and supplies and transactions and resources. It seems to me that the world economy really is in trouble for an extended period of time. Now, I've said that don't rely on forecasts. Don't look at precise forecasts, but I will throw one out to you. The International Monetary Fund has produced a forecast for the world economy, and it shows basically that it's 3 times worse right now than back in the last recession in 2009. But in terms of next year, well then, you see, that's the problem. You hit the nail on the head, because I think that as far as the price of oil is concerned, a huge thing for Canada, that is so much influenced by the world economy. And that's why I'm saying, don't be overly optimistic. If you see West Texas get up to $30 to $35, don't think it's, it's the end of the story. This could be a very tricky future for commodities because of the world economy and the virus effect on the weakest part of the world. And then, of course, what that does with commodity prices, oil, it influences the Canadian dollar as well.
Given the ability of the pharmaceutical companies to collaborate to bring to market a vaccine in 6 to 7 months as opposed to the traditional 6 or 7 or 10 years, what effect is this going to have on the biotech and the pharmaceutical industry on a go-forward basis?
It's tricky because some of the therapeutic treatments that are in the toolkit right now maybe won't be needed if we do have a vaccine. So it could be that some of these biotech companies that are spending, hundreds of millions of dollars in developing drugs and products that are part of the prophylactic effort, they could be displaced completely by vaccines. So it's tricky out there as an investor. You have opportunities, but you also have big risks. It all depends on, as an investor, on your risk portfolio and how much runway you have in terms of your life cycle investment plan.
One of the things that has been a hot topic, and I think has sort of been put to the back burner, and now you have the U.S. government, the European government, the Canadian government spending so much money on making sure there's liquidity in the market. What effect is this going to have on climate change and the emission standards and things and all the agreements, the protocols that have been agreed to? And I think there was word that Trudeau in his his last program that he implemented this week to the larger entities had some sort of subtle climate change tones in it.
Strings attached. Strings attached, Jason. You're absolutely right. For the large company financial assistance plan. That's right. Strings attached. Well, my worry is that it's going to cost so much to deal with this problem. And looking at Canada, looking at what we have on our hands in Canada in terms of Canada's federal budget deficit, we've been rolling out big plans, very expensive plans, on a weekly basis, it seems. And the federal deficit at the end of April 24th, it was projected to be $250 billion, the federal deficit for the current year. And now it's going to be, looks like it'll be well over $300 billion. And so in terms of government support for green technology, there's not going to be a lot of money in the bank on the government side to be able to dole out to subsidize green industries. And so many of these green industries do need government subsidies. And, if I do remember back several business cycles ago, when we first had the oil sands as the big player, the oil sands disappeared. Now, of course, that's not a green type of industry, but we did have the oil sands kind of disappear for several decades because the price of oil and the price of gasoline got so low. And so if we are looking at a world of low oil prices going ahead for some years, it seems to me that's a negative factor for alternative fuels.
It wouldn't be complete if I didn't ask a couple of real estate questions. And you talked about Canada's household debt and it being 100% of GDP.
Right.
How do you think the Canadian government, with the number of unemployed people, are going to deal with the residential stress tests that they've implemented over the last 18 to 24 months? And what effect will that have on the residential real estate market in Canada?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, the stress tests were basically to try and water down real estate speculation. And what we have in our hands probably is a period of declining house prices. Right now, in Canada, the residential housing market is basically frozen. We don't have buyers and we don't have sellers. So people really don't understand what the future is going to be like. My view is that in the United States, you are not going to see a foreclosure crisis. And that means that house prices in the United States, while they might go down to some extent, they're not going to crash. So that's good as far as we are concerned in Canada, because if U.S. house prices are not crashing, you don't get that news coming through to Canada on a day-to-day basis through the media. Now, I'm worried that in Canada we have such high unemployment, and the unemployment numbers will keep rising, even though the economy is beginning to recover. That's important to know because the unemployment numbers are a lagging indicator. They're not coincident, it's a lagging indicator. So unemployment will continue to rise as the economy begins to restart in Canada. To me, that means that you really have a debt problem in Canada, and mortgage debt is a big issue. And it's a big issue for the lenders as well, for the banks and also the non-bank lenders. And it shows up not just in mortgage interest payments, but it also shows up in rents. And we do have programs in Canada on the rent side to help with that problem. But I think that we really have an issue with respect to non-residential real estate in Canada. Because if landlords are not getting paid rent, that means that landlords in turn aren't going to be able to pay their taxes and aren't going to be able to pay their utility bills. And so you have second round effects going on to municipal governments and utilities and other things like that. So I think that this household debt is the tip of the iceberg as far as Canada is concerned. And it's one reason that in the end, our cycle might be deeper and might take longer to get it turned around.
I have two more questions, and then we'll let you go because I know you have an appointment at 4 o'clock. I think the borders are scheduled to open June the 21st to non-essential travel.
That's correct.
What
Canada-U.S.
do you
border.
think, Canada-U.S. border. Do you think that will change, and what effect will there be any increase in tourism and cross-border travel when that restriction is removed on the 21st of June?
I don't think so, Jason. I think that I would look carefully at the infections numbers that we're seeing. And again, I'm citing worldometers, which I look at a lot. In terms of new cases in the United States, we're still running on a daily basis over 20,000 new cases. The peak was just under 40,000, and that was back in April 24th. But on the 12th and 13th of May, we're still over 20,000 new cases per day in the United States. And in Canada, we are still around 1,100 new cases per day. That's the number for the 12th and 13th of May. Our number peaked at around 1,800 April 24th. So to me, it's a good possibility these borders will stay closed for a bit longer. And I would say that as far as holidays are concerned, I don't think people are going to be able to fly anytime soon. And even if they are, I don't think that many people will want to. It's not just getting into a crowded airplane where the middle seats are taken, and they are taken. We've seen evidence of that in the last few days, even though the airlines say they will, quote, try, quote, to keep middle seats open. They're not always that way. And in terms of lining up for security and in terms of lining up for immigration, we all know what immigration halls look like. Can you imagine social distancing taking place in an immigration hall or in a lineup to go through security? So that's not going to happen. People might want to be willing to travel by car, and I would support that. That would be the kind of holiday I would take. I would get in a car and drive for, 500 miles there and back. But no, I don't think that leisure and hospitality are going to open up anytime soon. And I think that's going to be one of the big structural changes that takes place as well. I think we're going to see a much different kind of hospitality and entertainment future for all of us.
I think a lot of people on the call today, and me in particular, whether it's the Bills or the Raptors or the Leafs or the Blue Jays or the TFC, sports plays a huge role in people's lives, whether you actually go to the venue or you watch it on TV. How are the professional leagues here and in Europe going to deal with this crisis? And
I think they're going to be studio. I think they're going to become studio events. They're going to be like something Hollywood events, where it takes place on a staged lot. You don't need fans, as long as you have background noise of people cheering. I remember in the old days, Jason, I used to listen to the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball games on the radio, okay? And Hal Kelly was one of the announcers. And I didn't realize they were not really in Syracuse at the ballpark. They were actually in their studio in downtown Toronto. And you could hear the ball hit the bat, and you could hear the fan noise, and you could hear the excitement in the announcer's voice. It was all coming in on a tape, I think, at the time. Yeah. Joe Crysdale and Hal Kelly. Those are the two names.
That goes back a long way. And
it does.
I think the last
I was just a kid. I was just a kid at the time.
The last question has to do with our minority government, the impending budget, and whether there will be one, and what will be included in it, and will that then precipitate a federal election?
Good points. It very well could, but it would seem to me that would be a strategy on the part of Justin Trudeau to probably, cement his place in Canada's political scene. My assessment is that he's very popular in Canada at the present time. He's got high approval ratings. He kind of, in a way, feeds off the unpopularity of President Trump. And it's kind of the good cop, bad cop kind of situation that Mr. Trudeau is the good guy. So yeah, that would probably cement his role. And well, what kind of opposition would he have anyway? So my feeling is there's going to be this shift in the populace in probably both countries towards a bigger role, a bigger safety net by governments. And that would include moving more towards guarantees on income, guaranteed incomes, this type of thing. And not right away, of course, because right away we're still in a struggle in terms of dealing with the economic crisis brought on by the health crisis. But as the health crisis begins to settle down, well, then the economic crisis is still on our hands, especially with how do we pay for it. And I'm saying it's going to be through wider taxation and a more progressive tax system, and let the rest work its way out over time. No inflation to help us pay it back for quite some time yet. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Well, with that being said, I think we've covered off most of everybody's questions. If people have questions, if they'd like to send them to me, I can forward them to Peter and get back to you. I'd like to thank Peter again for this update on where we're at and where we're going. I think we've focused the last 2 months on issues and government subsidies, and now I think it's time to focus on making sure that we can take these subsidies and put them to use and adapt our business to the new normal. So on that note, I would like to thank Peter for his insight and thank everybody for participating. We will send out the recording of this for you to go back and take notes. The website that Peter talks about is worldometers.info/coronavirus. It is quite a good site, and I think if you spend a little bit of time at looking at Denmark and Norway, Finland, and then look at Sweden and the differences in how they've dealt with things, it's interesting. And you can look at Vietnam. A former employee of mine is a principal at KPMG, and they're wide open, and we chat about how things have worked. And he said the government there has played a significant role in managing things. And so it's going to be interesting this weekend how many people go to their cottage and whether Doug Ford goes to the cottage. But I think there's interesting times, and if we approach it with a positive attitude, there's lots of opportunity out there. So on that note, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jason.